I just remember in that moment, and again, it was God. I just knew that if I let that blackness consume me, that that it wouldn't be good for me or anybody. And so, like, just as quickly as I started to kind of fade into that abyss, there was just this moment where I said, you know what, I'm not gonna let this consume me. I just know that I don't ever want to make anybody feel like the way that I'm feeling right now. And that was kind of like a turning point for me. And so for I just knew at that point that it would be better for me, even when people teased me, even when people made fun of me, to not allow that to make me respond with hate. And I just started viewing the world differently, and it got better, and eventually it was still hard, but it wasn't, it didn't take me to those dark places anymore.
Before these streets bore our names, they carried our footsteps. Before the skyline stretched upward, we built from the ground. In every corner of the city, our stories whispered from brick walls, church pews, and barbershop chairs. Here in Kansas City, Black excellence doesn't ask permission. It builds, leads, heals, creates, and reigns. The voices you are about to hear are not just stories. These are sacred echoes, the roots and rise of our present, the regals shaping what's to come. This is Echoes of the City. Some stories don't just deserve to be heard, they deserve to be honored. Kansas City has produced many voices, but every now and then a voice emerges that carries out not just words, but weight. A voice shaped by family, faith, and a journey that requires resilience long before recognition. A voice that learned early that poetry isn't just art, it's a lifeline, a protest, a prayer. In this film, you will meet Glenn North, a son of Kansas City who turned questions into courage, detours into destiny, and pain into purpose. You'll hear how community shaped him, how moments of adversity refined him, and how a gift placed in his hand as a child became the calling on his life. Glenn didn't just find poetry, he built a movement. He created spaces where voices once ignored could finally be amplified. And through mentorship, he lit a path for the next generation to rise. This documentary isn't about what happened to Glenn, it's about what awakened in him. Welcome to Echoes of the City, the roots and rise of Kansas City Black Regals. Welcome to the story of Glenn North.
My name is Glenn North. I am the Director of Inclusive Learning and Creative Impact and the Poet in Residence at the Museum of Kansas City. I was born and raised here in Kansas City, right off of 51st and Paseo, so I would say that part of town really helped to shape me. Prior to that, was raised at right off of 21st and Woodland in a subdivision called Lincoln Gardens. And so I think those two places really helped to shape who I am and really gave me a foundation in terms of being in love with the city that I was born and raised in. So one of my earliest memories is when I was 5 years old and we had first moved into Lincoln Gardens, which was right off of 21st and Woodland. We had just moved from like 29th and Tracy, and me, my mom and dad had all slept in the same bed in that efficiency apartment. And this was the first time that I was gonna have my own bedroom, and my mother was pregnant with my little sister. And it was just a really happy time in our lives. So my father, and I didn't find this out until later in life, but was one of the first Black men to get promoted into middle management at TWA, Trans World Airlines, which was a huge employer here in Kansas City back in the 70s. And he was just a great provider. And from what I understand from people who I met that worked with him, and this is later on in life, he never shared any of this with me when I was growing up, that he always looked out for the Black employees, that he really tried to create opportunities for them to seek out management positions and promotions at TWA as well. So I didn't know any of this when I was growing up, but it was really an exciting time in our lives. And one of the cool things was working for TWA, we could get discounted tickets. So my father was able to make sure that all of our family was able to go to family reunions and different family vacations because of the benefits that he got at TWA. So he was kind of the man in our family in that regard. So my relationship with my father is kind of complicated. I think that's probably not unusual with Black men especially. You know, he was very much, he was very practical and pragmatic, and he was very good with money. He was very frugal, and he believed in an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. I, on the other hand, was kind of weird, kind of nerdy, really creative, into the arts and culture. And so when I was growing up, I don't know that we always saw things, we didn't always see eye to eye. But now that I've matured and I see how life is, I really have grown to appreciate him in terms of his ability to take care of our family, to be a great provider, and to make the sacrifices that were necessary for our family to not only, I just remember growing up not only having the things that I needed, but having the things that I wanted. I don't remember ever, it's not like we were rich or anything, but I don't ever remember having to struggle. And I know my father had to work hard to make sure that we didn't have to go through certain changes that I saw some of my friends going through. So as I've gotten older, I just have really learned to appreciate and admire that in a whole different way. So my relationship with my mother was totally different. My mother really got me. She understood me. My parents split when I was 8. And when I was 11, I went to live with my dad because my mother felt like it was important for me to have that male influence in my life. But her and I were very close. Although I wasn't living with her, you know, we would be on the phone for hours at a time. And so from about the time I was 11 up until graduating high school, I got teased a lot, got bullied a lot. I have alopecia, which, you know, back in the late 70s, early 80s, people weren't talking about it in the way that they do now. And so although it didn't harm me physically, you know, alopecia is just an autoimmune deficiency disease that where your antibodies attack your hair cells. So it just affects your hair growth. But kind of being bald-headed and skinny and not very athletic at a time when, you know, the Jerry curl and the natural and all those things were really popular, it was difficult. And so my father was just kind of, you know, he was a man's man. He came from that old school, so I didn't talk to him a lot about what I was going through, but I could share it with my mother, and she just always kept me encouraged and just instilled within me having the self-confidence that was necessary to deal with that and to not to let it break me. So both of my parents worked when I was growing up. So my relationship with my grandparents, my grandmother in particular, I was very close to her. She was one of my best friends. We had so much fun together. And she is the one who introduced me to poetry. She would always get me really cool gifts for my birthday and for Christmas. But on my 8th birthday, she gave me a copy of the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, and she challenged me to memorize it. And I was not thrilled at all about that. You know, I wanted to know, where was the toys, where's the clothes? But because I loved her so much, I decided that what happened was she challenged me to memorize that poem. And so I memorized it. And I remember a few days after my birthday when I was able to recite it back to her. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, not give way to hating and yet not look too good nor talk too wise. So that's like the first stanza, and the poem gives all this advice. And then the last 2 lines say, if you can feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. Then yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So memorizing the poem If gave me a real sense of confidence. I didn't fully understand the poem at the time, but I felt like I did get some of it, enough of it for me to feel like I kind of had access to information a lot of other young people my age didn't have access to. And so then I aspired to live out the philosophy that that poem was communicating, like all of the things that it takes to be strong and to deal with adversity and to be resilient. And little did I know at the time, but that poem would give me kind of an anchor as I got older when I was facing tough situations. It gave me inspiration, it grounded me, and I was always grateful to my grandmother. That's the best gift she could have ever given me. And not long after that, I started writing my own poems. So I was in the 5th grade, and there was this citywide contest. It was sponsored by, it was a show that came on PBS on Channel 19. It was similar to Sesame Street, but it was called Villa Alegre. And I wish I knew what that means. But it was this Hispanic show, but they wanted to reach young people of all ages. And so, you know, in the 70s, that's when the whole self-esteem movement kind of began. You started to see a lot of self-help books, and you know, in the education system, it was all about like building self-esteem in young people. So they had this contest called the Why I Like Me contest, and I wrote a poem, and I got 2nd place, and I got a chance to meet the mayor. They published my poem in the paper. I was on different TV shows getting interviewed. This contest at the time was really a big deal. And so my 5th grade class, they threw a surprise party for me. And I was like, this writing thing is pretty cool. This is something that I might pursue. So I really feel like having alopecia, when I look back at it in retrospect, it was really a blessing. It was tough. Like, I'm so grateful that it's not, like a lot of kids thought because I was losing my hair that I had leukemia, you know, and I did not have leukemia. I did not have a disease that was that serious, but the perception really did cause, like I said, a lot of teasing, a lot of bullying. And I think that it just gave me an understanding of how important it is to be confident within, and not to let what other people think about you determine, you know, who you are. I mean, it hurt. It hurt a lot. It was really dark. I was depressed a lot, you know, as a teenager, and a lot of dark days, but there was still something within me that understood that, you know, they just didn't get me. You know, they were judging me based on my appearances, and somehow it was the good Lord, I would have to say. There was something within me that understood that even though I was getting teased and bullied, that those people, I just didn't let that perception of who I was define me. And I think that has helped me, you know, throughout the years. I also came to an understanding that I didn't ever want to treat people that way. And I think that has really provided me with a way of seeing humanity in a way that I might not have if I had not gone through that. From the time I was in 7th grade, like I said, to the time I graduated high school, it wasn't until I got into college that things kind of started to even out a little bit. So every day was a struggle. But this one particular day, because I would walk home down Paseo, because I went to Bishop Hogan High School, which is on 63rd Street, and I lived on 51st. So I would just walk down Paseo. And some of the school buses that would come by, not from Bishop Hogan, but from other schools that went down Paseo, you know, they would say stuff, they would shout stuff off of the bus or whatever. And then it kind of escalated. So then they would like throw paper and pencils and stuff like that off the bus at me. And one day I was walking home, and I could have taken a different way home, but it just felt like I shouldn't have to do. I should be able to walk down the street and not have to worry about people, teasing me and saying negative things about me. So for whatever reasons, I just always still walk that same way home. And one day, somebody had thrown a rock and it hit me in the head, and I just remember in that moment just feeling so much hate. Just it's like I went black, like the world went black, and I think about some of the school shootings and things that we hear about with kids that get bullied. And although, in the early 80s, school shooting wasn't the phenomena that it has become, I think that was the kind of rage that fuels what some young people think is the answer to retaliate against that type of bullying. But I just remember in that moment, and again, it was God. I just knew that if I let that blackness consume me, that that it wouldn't be good for me or anybody. And so, like, just as quickly as I started to kind of fade into that abyss, there was just this moment where I said, you know what, I'm not gonna let this consume me. I just know that I don't ever want to make anybody feel like the way that I'm feeling right now. And that was kind of like a turning point for me. And so I just knew at that point that it would be better for me, even when people teased me, even when people made fun of me, to not allow that to make me respond with hate. And I just started viewing the world differently, and it got better, and eventually it was still hard, but it wasn't, it didn't take me to those dark places anymore. Yeah, so I attended Lincoln University in Jeff City, Missouri, a historically black college, and my grandfather and grandmother had attended school there, and so I felt that I was standing on their shoulders, and I really enjoyed the fact that I was in this space where I was really learning to understand what it meant to be a black man in this country. Prior to going to Lincoln University, I understood bigotry. I understood when like a white person didn't like a black person, and for based on the color of their skin, or a black person didn't like a white person. That's bigotry. But when I got to Lincoln University, I really began to understand systemic racism and white supremacy and how that impacts every area of human activity, whether we're talking about education, economics, religion, entertainment, and how the deck has been stacked against us. And so I really became motivated to want to do something about it. And so I eventually became a student government president. That was awesome. The following year, the person who was student government president after me would sometimes call me if they needed advice. And so that year we were able to get Public Enemy for our homecoming concert. Just to offer a little bit of context, Lincoln University at that time, although it was a historically black college, the student body was comprised mostly of white students. White students made up about 60% of the student population, but they didn't participate in campus activities. A lot of them came because it was close and economical. A lot of them majored in agriculture and things like that. So they didn't really participate in the culture of Lincoln University. So they didn't participate in homecoming. And if anybody understands homecoming at a black college, that's like Christmas, right? It's just like a huge, it's homecoming. It's a big family reunion. It's a big deal. And we were really excited that Public Enemy was coming that year. And one of the parents of a white student complained about Public Enemy coming, and the administration said that we couldn't bring them anymore. Contracts had been signed, all of that, and based on the complaint of one parent, we weren't able to have that concert. And so as I began to challenge that, I started to learn more about to be honest with you, the administration's complicity in moving Lincoln University away from being a historically black college to to an agricultural institution. There were a lot of things that they were doing that I felt were in direct opposition to the legacy of Lincoln University and other historically black colleges, and I began to challenge that. And that created a lot of friction and conflict in terms of my being a student at that university. Well, I remember we had put together all of this information about the fact that there had never been any violent occurrences at a Public Enemy concert. Talks about the fact that a historically black college was an opportunity for black students to express themselves creatively and culturally, and Public Enemy seemed to be aligned with that. And, we just didn't feel that it was fair that concert would be canceled. And so one of the administrators that I was challenging said, well, you know what, Glenn, the bottom line is they spend more money here. And it was like a chill went through my body. And so having been SGA president and having a lot of, access to information with what was going on in terms of the administration, I found out that a lot of the people who were at the university at that time were considering changing the status of that university. They were considering canceling the football program, which would have took a lot of young black men out of the college. They were considering making it an agricultural institution and focusing primarily on the rural population. There were a lot of inner city kids that went to Lincoln University from Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, and they were going to just totally change the demographic. And I just felt like I had to fight against that. And so I began to expose those things that I learned, much to the, frustration of the university officials at that time. So I went from kind of being the campus darling to the campus radical, all during that whole situation with Public Enemy. And I eventually got expelled, got kicked out. At that time, we're talking about 1990, right? So this was, apartheid was still being contested. Nelson Mandela was still in prison at the time. And there was a lot of conversation in this country about divesting from companies and organizations that supported apartheid in South Africa. And so, although I had been protesting and passing out a lot of literature, the administration still would pull me in sometimes if we had a dignitary on campus. And so Naomi Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu's daughter, was coming to give a speech and to talk about the evils of apartheid. And they asked me to show her around and to introduce her at the speaking engagement that was going to take place. And about an hour before she was about to do her presentation, I got called into the dean's office, and I won't use the language he used, but it was he said, if you F with me, he said, listen, you can get up there and you can say whatever you want to say about apartheid and the evils that are going on in South Africa, but if you bring up any of the stuff that you've been bringing up about what's going on here, I will F you up. He said, I know who you hang out with. I know what they're doing. And if you try me, you're going to regret it. I mean, it was almost like he was spitting. I mean, he was just shouting at me, and it was really intimidating. I can't even, I really was very trepidatious about how I was going to introduce her, because I had this whole thing planned out because I was really going to light it up. And so I went up to the event, and when the curtain opened, I did what I had originally planned to do. I did exactly what he told me not to do, and in fact, I implicated him. I said, about 15 minutes ago, I had a very interesting conversation with one of our campus officials. Everybody knew who I was talking about, and that speech went over very well. But that following Monday, I got a letter saying that I was getting expelled because I delivered a diatribe that was could have incited a riot. So basically, they said I tried to start a riot, and that's why I got kicked out of school. But here's the thing, and it's just being real. A lot of the guys that I was hanging out with were selling drugs. A lot of the times we talk about the crack epidemic and how it impacted the inner cities, but crack impacted the Black community, period. It wasn't just the inner city. I mean, there were so many people. And so, in Jefferson City, if you, had bought, I'm gonna just be real. So like a rock in Kansas City that would sell for $10 would sell for 20 in Jeff City. You didn't have a police force that really understood all of the dynamics of the drug trade at that time. You had a naive police force. You didn't have a lot of competition, right? There wasn't like, living on 39th Street in Kansas City or on the south side of Chicago. Jeff City, you didn't have a lot of that competition from other people that were selling dope or whatever. So it was kind of an easy thing. So it was a lot of guys who, not your typical drug dealer. I mean, they was going to class with the backpacks and, you know what I mean, taking care of business, but they sold dope. And so the campus was aware of that. The administration was aware of that. And they knew, although that, I wasn't selling drugs, that I was hanging out with guys that did. And, I partied, I participated in a lot of the extracurriculars that came along with that lifestyle. So I'm not trying to make it sound like, I was an innocent in all of it. And about a month later, after, I had given that speech and gotten expelled and I was planning on coming home and trying to figure things out, we got busted. And I was looking at 3 to 5 years federal time for conspiracy to sell a controlled substance. At that time, you didn't necessarily have to sell dope to be to come up. You could be charged with conspiracy even though you might not have sold dope. And so it was really a rough time. The lesson that I learned from that period of my life was that you can't be pointing fingers at folks for things that you feel are wrong, injustices, when you are not living above reproach. And I had studied the civil rights movement. I knew and understood, even though I didn't live up to that legacy, that was a spiritual fight. Like, Dr. King and the young people, the college students that sat at those lunch counters, or the Montgomery when they boycotted the buses, or the Freedom Riders when they were trying to make public accommodations on cross-country transportation on buses, fare, that they would fast, that they would pray, that they would live their lives in such a way that they were creating an example. It's a line from a poem that always convicts me. It says, "The eye's a better pupil and more willing than the ear, for advice may be misleading, but examples are always clear." So I was giving advice, but I wasn't living an example, and I got chastised for it. And it taught me that if you really feel like you want to stand up and fight against injustice, it's important that you live your life in such a way that they're gonna try to set you up anyway, but you can't give them nothing, right? I was running around and doing stuff I had no business doing, and I paid thank God I didn't pay the ultimate price, because that case got thrown out thanks to my Uncle Buddy. Shout out to Basil North Jr., who is an excellent lawyer. But yeah, so when that bus went down, I mean, it was clear that none of the evidence that they had any of my fingerprints on it. The house that they busted wasn't in my name. So it got thrown out, and I was able to move on with my life. But yeah, so I learned that it's important to live your life by example. If you're gonna be trying to point out the injustices that exist, you have to live your life above reproach. So after I got kicked out of Lincoln University, I was working different jobs in Kansas City, and I was doing fine, but I just didn't have a real sense of purpose. One of my frat brothers, who was relatively well off, was moving to DC to go to Howard, and he was going to medical school at Howard. And he said, man, why don't you come up? You know, I got an apartment in DC. I got 2 bedrooms already. Come up there, and you could even finish school at Howard and go ahead and get your degree and move forward. So I was like, cool. So I moved to DC with him, got a job on Howard's campus, and I never went to Howard. I never enrolled. Let me just get that out of the way. Although I worked there, I started to meet a lot of different people who were doing different things. Just a lot of impressive, young Black folks who were upwardly mobile, and I was meeting young people who were second and third generation law school, medical school, entrepreneurs, came from these really prestigious families and things like that. So it was it was an opportunity for me to really be in company with a lot of young Black people who were doing some incredible things. And so I hadn't gotten back into school yet. And so I was starting to really feel like, what did I come up here for? What's really going on? I was still partying, having a good time, all of that. And so another frat brother of mine who found out that I enjoyed poetry said, hey, man, you should come down to U Street. They have these places where you can do spoken word. And I had never even heard the term spoken word, but I was like, cool. And so I had this poem that I had written, and I went to this, it was a place called State of the Union. It was a little bar on U Street where they did spoken word and poetry readings. And I went in there and I shared this poem, and I got a standing ovation. Getting a standing ovation the first time that I had performed a spoken word poem was similar to me, to that feeling I got when I recited If to my grandmother after I had memorized it. It felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I didn't fully understand what that meant, because I couldn't calculate how you could make a living doing spoken word, but it just felt really in line with how I was hardwired. And so, it was magical. Rather than getting back into school, which is what I went up there to do, I started to really get immersed in the spoken word scene in DC. I just started to seek that out more and more, and really fell in love with the spoken word and poetry scene in DC. And DC is just such an incredible, like I said, it was just so many, young Black people that just had their heads on straight and they was moving and shaking. And I went from kind of being this dude from Kansas City. I remember a lot of times people would say, well, are there any Black people that live in Kansas City? You living with people who come from the East Coast and a lot of big cities or whatever. And so I represented Kansas City in fine fashion, just for the record. But so to go from kind of this outsider to being known in that city, and in certain circles for this guy that performs poetry, it gave me a real sense of identity. I think that spoken word really comes out of the Black experience. If you look at the trajectory, so not to go too far down a rabbit trail, but I would say that Langston Hughes was the father of what we refer to now as jazz poetry. And Langston Hughes started to use jazz music as inspiration for the poetry he was writing, in terms of its cadence, in terms of its subject matter. And so as he began to spend more time with jazz musicians, he started looking at poetry not only as a literary art form, but as one that was performative. Now, poetry in its origin is an oral art form, but in America, I would say in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it had become more of a academic pursuit. It was kind of trapped in the ivory tower, And Langston Hughes and people like him started to bring poetry back to the people. And so Langston Hughes started performing with like jazz musicians and things like that. So there's this performance aspect that he really helped to popularize. So then fast forward to like the beat poets with like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. They were heavily influenced by bebop. And so they were doing more of this performative thing. Amiri Baraka, who was hanging out with them at the time, he was Leroy Jones, but Amiri Baraka became the father of the Black Arts Movement. And he really felt like poetry could be important for its revolutionary properties, like poetry and art. He started the Black Arts Movement. So just to take it back, I know I'm kind of going in all these different places, but Langston Hughes was one of the progenitors of the Harlem Renaissance, right? So Black artists like him and Countee Cullen and Claude McKay and Duke Ellington and all of these artists were demonstrating that Black people were human at a time where some people didn't consider us to be human. The Harlem Renaissance was about showing that Black people have the ability to produce this high art. And if you see how capable and talented we are, then you have to respect our humanity, right? So then Amiri Baraka comes up under that and he says, you know what? Not only are we human, y'all have been mistreating us so much, it's time for revolution. And so he starts the Black Arts Movement, which kind of says that, hey, any art that we produce, any poetry that we're writing needs to have this revolutionary kind of aesthetic. And I think all of that laid the foundation for what ultimately became hip hop and the emergence of spoken word. So I think if you look at the roots of it, it's all rooted in social justice. I hope I made sense with all of that. But yeah, I think that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it came out of the Black experience. So I moved to DC in 93. I would say about 6 or 7 months after I got there is when I started to get involved in the scene. And just as I was really starting to make a name for myself and things were kind of starting to come together, my father got sick. I lost one of my closest friends, and it just felt like it was time to come back to Kansas City. So I came back to Kansas City in 97. So when I came back to Kansas City in 97, I did not have a vision. I was really depressed. It was kind of like a culture shock. And I felt like I really missed living in DC and that Kansas City was too slow. And I was complaining a lot about that. But that was the same year that Love Jones came out. And Love Jones, I think many would agree that was such a departure from what we had seen in terms of Black movies at that time. It was just a slice of life, a rich love story. And the backdrop was the spoken word scene in Chicago. And so a lot of folks in Kansas City were like, why don't we have something like that here? And so when people would say that, I'd be like, when I was living in DC, it was a spot you could go to every night. And I was, talking all the smack. And one night I was hanging out with one of my partners, a guy named Jay Hawkins. And Jay said to me, he said, why are you, talking so bad about Kansas City? Rather than doing that, why don't you do something? Why don't you make something happen since you so big and bad, basically. And I was like, wow, you're right. He checked me. And it hit me that I knew what to do. I mean, basically all you needed was a place and a stage and a mic. And so at that time, we had been hearing a lot of conversations around the revitalization of the 18th and Vine Jazz District. And, there was conversations about the American Jazz Museum and the Negro League Baseball Museum opening up, all these different clubs and restaurants. And so Jay and I started talking about, like, what if we start a poetry reading? And we was like, yeah, let's do it. And then we got my friend Marcus Brown, who was working with young people at the time. He was working at Genesis School, and he was doing an audio-visual production program with them. So he had a lot of sound equipment and stuff, which is what we needed. And so Jay, Marcus, and I decided that we were going to start this monthly poetry reading called Verbal Attack. And we found this little bar called the Mardi Gras on 19th and Vine. And we started that in June of 97. In September of 97, 18th and Vine opened up all the museums and everything. And the first time I ever got paid to perform a poem was at the opening celebration of of the American Jazz Museum. They paid me $50. I was like, okay, I'm a professional. And and we just kept that going, and we started, I think, having a real impact on the community and introducing Kansas City to the power of spoken word. I think Verbal Attack really planted a seed, and I think Kansas City was already hungry for something like that. There was so much talent here. So one of the groups that were performing Verbal Attack all the time, they were called the Black Poets Collective. Just an incredible group of poets who were all about the Black aesthetic and Black power. And so after a couple of months of performing at Verbal Attack at the Mardi Gras, they started hosting a poetry event at the Blue Room. And so you had kind of these two different groups that were doing poetry. Verbal Attack was a little more gritty and kind of hip hop inspired. The Black Poets Collective was a little more upscale, a little more refined, more of a jazz aesthetic. But we just, there was just a vibe. And then after that, there was a poetry reading that jumped off at Danny's Big Easy that was down on Main at the time. And then there was a group that started poetry reading called Urban Literation, ULIT for short. And it just seems like all of these different organizations kind of started to sprout up, and there was just this wave, and it hasn't stopped. I eventually got hired at the American Jazz Museum. I became the Director of Education and the Poet in Residence at the American Jazz Museum. And so with that institutional backing, I was able to bring in poets from all over the country. Some of you all might remember Def Poetry Jam. I was able to bring in a lot of poets who have performed on HBO. And what I think made Kansas City different is that on the East Coast, there's kind of this cadence and style that was just pretty much everybody who, came from the East Coast kind of had the same cadence, or everybody who came from the West Coast kind of had a similar cadence. And I don't mean to say this disrespectfully, not trying to create any kind of beef, but I think what made Kansas City unique is that we didn't have those influences. Everybody was kind of drawn on their own experience. Everyone was drawn on their own kind of ideas. And so when people from the coast or other big cities would come to Kansas City and they would hear other poets, one of the things that they would always say is that there are so many unique voices here. Like there's so many different styles. There's so many different ways that people are expressing themselves that people found exciting. So I think there's something about living in the Midwest where you don't always have that homogeny of like, this is what it ought to be. Like we're all kind of trying to figure it out because we're here in the Midwest, and you get these very unique voices. So I remember when we were starting Verbal Attack, and I was asking Marcus, who was working at Genesis at the time, as I said, I was like, hey man, you got this sound equipment. We ain't got no AV. We need you to come help us with that. And I said, how much would you charge me for it? He said, I won't charge you any money, but I do have something that I'm gonna need for you to do. And I said, what is that? He said, I'm gonna need you to work with young people. And I said, well, what, do you want me to do like a workshop for a week or something like that? He said, no, I need you to be committed for the rest of your life to helping develop young people. And nobody had ever challenged me like that. And I always appreciate Marcus for planting that seed. And so we started doing things around with different neighborhood organizations, doing things with Genesis. And then I found out about this national poetry festival called Brave New Voices, where young people from all over the country would come and compete with their original spoken word poems, kind of similar to speech and debate, right? And you had these different teams coming from everywhere. You had 500 students from all over the country coming to a different city each year. The first year we went, it was in Washington, D.C. The second year was like in Atlanta. It was always in a different city. And they would bring in poets, amazing poets. I'm talking about like Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Jessica Caremore. They would bring in all of these incredible poets from all over the country to work with the young people and really wanted to instill in young people the importance of social justice and community service. So whatever city we went in, there was some kind of community service project that the students would have to participate in. These festivals would take place for about a week every summer. And so when I heard about Brave New Voices, I wanted to take a group of students to that. So we would go to Brave New Voices every year. And then I found out about this citywide youth poetry festival that was happening in Chicago called Louder Than a Bomb. And so with Louder Than a Bomb, different high schools in Chicago would compete against each other. And I wanted something like that for Kansas City. I hadn't quite figured out how to, make what I was doing accessible to a larger number of students. I was basically taking students who I had contact with, but how could I spread my net broader? And so Louder Than a Bomb kind of gave me the framework for that. So I went to Chicago, went to a couple of trainings to figure out how to bring Louder Than a Bomb to Kansas City, worked with a teacher over on the Kansas side named Paul Richardson. So back, I would say probably 2011, we started doing that. And we had, at the peak of it, 25 different high schools from all over, Kansas and Missouri competing. And then whatever team won that would go on to the national competition, Brave New Voices. And I would say that that is some of the most important work that I've ever done, giving young people an opportunity to travel, to be exposed to other young people who are doing incredible things in the cities that they came from, being able to be around other young people who were performing at an incredibly high level. Just enormously. There are two documentaries. One is called Louder Than a Bomb, that is probably available. And Russell Simmons did a whole series on Brave New Voices on HBO, just to really demonstrate how powerful just helping young people find their voice creatively, helping young people understand that they have a responsibility to make the world a better place than they found it, and empowering them to do that it was just an amazing time. I had a student who was on the team, and him and some of his friends were hanging out one night in a park, and some guy randomly shot up the car. And the student whose car it wasn't driving. He had one of his friends driving. So his friend got killed. And so he was having survivor's remorse. He also, should mention, got shot in the back. But all of this happened at the time when we were preparing to go to Brave New Voices. His school, Paseo, had won Louder Than a Bomb, the local competition, and we were preparing for the national competition when all of this happened. And so there were several on the team that year. It was all young black men. We didn't have any young black women that were on the team that year, just for whatever reason. And so, we were going to the hospital trying to keep them uplifted, and it was just a very rough time. And so I told him, I said, hey man, you are still more than welcome to go to Brave New Voices, but don't worry about competing. Just come and hang out and heal. And he was like, no, Mr. North, I want to compete. And so I was like, hey, like poetry can be therapeutic, but I want to make sure you're getting whatever therapy you need, whatever support you need to deal with this trauma. Like this is real, and I don't want you to, I want you to deal. I want you to heal. I don't want you to run from it, right? He's like, no, I ain't running, man. I want to compete. So I was like, okay. So he gets out of the hospital, and he's writing poems about what he experienced. And I'll just be honest, the poems weren't very good. The poems were opportunities for him to express his emotions and to get it out. But in terms of this competition that we're going to, and I just would sit down with him. I said, I'm not trying to judge your experience, but if you really want to compete, I don't want you to go up here and not do a good job, and if you're saying you want to compete, then you're gonna have to write some good poems so that we'll have a chance, because we're a team. And he understood that, and I would challenge him to rewrite it again and rewrite it again, and he rewrite it again. And then the other guys on the team started to write poems that were kind of in conversation with the poetry that he was working on for the competition. So we go to Brave New Voices, and to be honest with you, the Kansas City team always represented in fine fashion, but we competing against teams from like Philly, from London, from New York. They have these huge machines behind them and a lot more money than we had, and coaches that are professional poets and stuff like that. So we always did a good job, but we was always kind of like the bad news bears. We was always kind of this little scrappy team, kind of trying to make a name for ourselves. And so that particular year, we go to Brave New Voices, and Brandon, well, his name is Brandon. I was trying not to say his name. Shout out to Brandon. But Brandon finally wrote this poem that really spoke to the experience that he had. It was a powerful poem. And the other young men on the team had other poems that really spoke to what it meant to be a young black man in America. And we made it to the semifinals. We had never made it to the semifinals before. And we were in the quarterfinals when Brandon did his poem. Even though all these students were competing, he got a standing ovation, and all of the kids in the audience just rushed up to the stage and they just hugged him and just gave him love. And to see Brandon be able to come from, in a couple of months, from seeing his best friend murdered, getting shot in the back, working through writing the poem that he felt was gonna be good enough for him to compete, and to get that kind of reception to the poem that he wrote from kids that was competing against him, no less, it was just amazing. I know that was a long story, but yeah, it really demonstrated to me how poetry can really help young people to deal with trauma. So back in 2009, I was the recipient of the Charlotte Street Generative Performing Artist Award. And at the time, the artists would get a $5,000 prize that was unrestricted. Like if you needed to pay your gas bill or your car note or whatever you needed to do with that $5,000 was okay. And Charlotte Street is just an amazing arts organization. And that Charlotte Street Generative Performing Award is very competitive. So for me to have won that award for spoken word, no less, there had never been anyone who had won for spoken word up to that point, was just very validating. That $5,000 kicked in at a time when I really needed it. And it really opened a lot of doors in terms of in terms of working with other arts organizations in the city. So that same year, 2009 was a very pivotal year. So the same year that I won the Charlotte Street Generative Performing Artist Award, I also was accepted into Kavi Kanam. And Kavi Kanam is a Black poetry organization. Kavi Kanam is a Latin phrase that means beware the dog. And Kavi Khanum was started by two incredible poets, Toy Derricote and Cornelius Eady. And they felt like they should do the work of protecting and guarding the canon of Black poetry and emerging Black poets as fiercely as a dog protects his home. So that's how they came up with the name Kavi Khanum. And so it's very competitive, but one of the things that Kavi Khanum offers is a week-long workshop every summer where you have the opportunity to work with some of the most outstanding African-American poets in the world. And it puts you in a fellowship that is beyond networking. It's really like a family. And being accepted into the Kavi Khanum Fellowship was really one of the high points of my achievements as a writer personally. It was very hard. I had to try 3 times before I got accepted. So 2009 was really a pivotal year. And Kavi Khanum has still, up to this very moment in time, had a huge impact on my development as a poet and really as a human being. It puts you in, it connects you to a group of amazing people. It's hard for me to put into words. So I finally got my MFA in 2020 at the ripe old age of 50. And I say that to encourage people to keep pushing. I started the graduate program at UMKC back in 2008 to pursue my Master of Fine Arts. But I've always loved learning, but I've never been a good student. And even back at LU, right? So I got kicked out and it took me forever to get back into school. I finally finished at Rockhurst University in 2006, and I got my undergraduate degree in English. And I had been out in the world as a poet, and I felt like I needed to undergird that with some, with some credentials. And so I had this undergraduate degree in English, and I wanted to pursue a graduate degree, and I decided to go to UMKC. But, it was very difficult, along with the fact that I was working full time. I was a non-traditional student. I was in a difficult marriage. Life just kept getting in the way. And so I would be in school one semester, then I'd be out for 2 years, then I'd get back in, and then I'd be out again. And then after a while, I just kind of just let it go. And in 2019, one of the instructors in the creative writing program at UMKC came up to me and said, "Hey man, this is silly. You've taken all of the graduate work. All you got left is your thesis. You need to go ahead and finish your thesis and get this degree and get it done, And I was like, you're right. So I enrolled in the spring of 2020 so that I could go ahead and finish my thesis. And as we all know, that was the same year that the COVID epidemic hit. And, that was a horrible time in the world, but in a very weird way, it became a blessing to me because I was stuck at home. And so I could really focus on finishing my thesis. And I finally did. And it was just such a sense of accomplishment to finally get that done and to get that under my belt that I would just encourage anybody, whatever it is that you're pursuing, never give up. Because I was about to, I had moved on. It was like, I guess it just won't happen. And, but it did. So yeah, that's something I'm proud of. I came to faith late in life. I was 33. I'd always believed that there was a God, but while I was at Lincoln University and I was learning about systemic racism and white supremacy, I was really of that mindset that Christianity is the white man's religion, and I just, although I believed in God, I felt like, okay, I'm spiritual, I'm cool. And so fast forward to like 98, 99, there were just a lot of things going on in my life. I was just partying and not taking life seriously, didn't have a whole lot of direction. I was doing poetry, I had verbal attack going, but I didn't know what verbal attack might lead to. Not just, I was existing, and had a bunch of people over at my house partying one night, and it's like God just spoke to me. It's like, is this all you want? Is this it? You just want to drink and get high and party and not ever really have a life that matters? And I just knew that I needed to find a different direction. And so I began just talking to God, like, show me who you are. So I was like, if it's Buddhism, if it's Islam, if it's Judaism, whatever, just show me the truth. Who are you? And I remember, like, when I was like, I dare you to show me who you are, And I had this little, they call them tracks, gospel tracks. And it's a little track that gives you like the plan of salvation. Ironically enough, I had found the track in a parking lot walking into a liquor store on 39th in Maine. But I just always kept it. I just always, for whatever reasons, just always had it with me. And so it was December of 1999, and I was in my mother's basement. I was trying to get my life back on track. I was just tired of myself. I had come to the end of myself. And something said, go get that track. What did it say? I had it, but I never really paid close attention to it. And I went and read it, and it offered the plan of salvation. And I met Jesus that night, not in the way that was like this booming voice that came out of the sky, but just this very powerful presence in my spirit. And I knew that I had met Christ. And so that was December of 99. And I started reading the Bible and going to church and learning about the tenets of Christianity. I became very interested in an aspect of theology called apologetics. And apologetics speaks to the historical veracity of Scripture. It speaks to the archaeological evidence that's available that helps us to understand that the things that we read about in the Bible, there's archaeological evidence to support it. There's prophetic evidence to support it. And not that, it always is going to come down to faith, right? But there was enough in me becoming introduced to apologetics to settle any doubt that I had. And so best decision I ever made. I know that God has gifted me with this love for poetry and the arts. And I feel like those are the things that I can use to try to give him the glory. And, I know that we live in a very pluralistic society, and there are many different systems of faith. But Christianity is the one that makes the most sense to me because, it's unique in that it almost seems like the deal is too good, right? Like, rather than you having to try to live your life in a way that in the end you've done more good than bad and you can somehow earn your way. Christianity says, you know what, you don't have to earn your way. You just have to trust that I took care of it, And that makes a lot of sense to me because I couldn't live up to my own expectations that I have for myself, let alone live up to the expectations that the creator of the universe would have for me. And so, I just feel like, you're not supposed to, like people say, don't talk about like religion and politics and it gets really controversial and things like that. But I think who we are spiritually is the most important thing. And if we can't have conversations about it and talk about it and exchange ideas, then there's no growth, right? So I've been in so many conversations with people who come from different backgrounds than me, and we all, we share, what we think, and we debate vigorously sometimes, but if it's done with love and respect, we challenge each other and we keep it moving. But yeah, I feel like who we are spiritually, that is the most important thing we as human beings can do, is to figure out who we are spiritually, because I don't think this isn't all there is. I'm very much interested in the intersection of art and social justice. And I would hope that in some small way that my love of poetry and my love of our people, someone who may come after might be inspired by that, and would want to continue to do something in the arts community to make things better for Black folks. It's just so important for us to see beyond ourselves and to realize that it's not about us. It's about planting seeds for trees that we may not ever enjoy the shade of. It's about, I feel like our ancestors were Afrofuturists. I think that the only way that they could survive being enslaved and being, experiencing racial terror even after slavery and lynching and Jim Crow and all of those things, was thinking to a time when their children or their children's children wouldn't have to live dealing with those same terrible conditions. And I think that there's still much work to do. And I think that if we are considering ourselves to be leaders, then our project should be, how do we make the world better for those who are coming after us?
Greatness isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but how deeply your voice echoes. Today we witness more than a story. We witness a life shaped by words that heal, words that challenge, words that build community. Glenn North showed that poetry isn't just something you write, it's something you become. He became a bridge between generations, between pain and purpose, between what Kansas City was and what it has power to be. Through every twist of his journey, he chose courage instead of bitterness, service instead of spotlight, legacy instead of applause. And because of that, Kansas City is not just home to poetry, Kansas City is home to a movement. For every young voice still searching for its place, for every artist wondering if their gift matters, for every dreamer who ever questioned if they were good enough, Glenn North stands as proof that purpose always rises. And the echoes of his life reminds us, when you use your gifts to lift others, your legacy never fades.
Kansas City, Kansas City. All I know is work hard, play hard, make a change for a lay in the graveyard. I know how to hustle hard. Boy, I earned this one. I was destined from the start, and I learned it from Kansas City.